All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us midday for a presentation on all things GitHub and open source. Our speaker today is Brian Holman. Brian is a manager of business intelligence at HealthSpark, local here in Portland, Oregon. So he's going to be covering Git, some introductory Git stuff, GitHub, and then how to go about contributing to open source projects. So I will pass it off to Brian. Yeah, all right, go ahead.
Hey, thanks so much, Chris. Hello, everybody. Usually, when I'm meeting people for the first time, I like to do one-on-one introductions, but there's too many people to do that here. So I'll just bypass that and be rude and just introduce myself, and you all can just like nod along. But yeah, Chris, thanks for the introduction. I've been little more flavor. My background is in academia. I actually have a degree in meteorology, and it was in the middle of grad school where I was wanting to become a professor of meteorology that I became disenchanted with the job outlooks for people with PhDs trying to get into academia. So I was lucky enough to attend a talk on big data, machine learning, data science from one of my advisors' research group. And basically this guy from industry said, hey, go learn Python, learn SQL, and go down this career path instead. And so I began that in earnest in 2015 and started learning Python in 2016 and haven't looked back. And now I am fortunate enough to lead an analytics team, as Chris said, for a company here in Portland, but we were recently acquired by a company based in Boston, and we are all about healthcare data, healthcare analytics, and trying to make, add a little bit more transparency to the black box and crazy system that is American healthcare. But today, what I really wanted to talk to you about is something that means a lot to me, and I'll explain about that in a second. But first, I'm going to start with the title of this talk. So it's all about GitHub and contributing to open source. And in order to talk about that, I'm going to talk about version control. But this talk is great for people along all aspects of the journey, that is learning about software development, learning about coding, and then also how to build software projects with others. And so I'm going to start first with just what is version control and why might you want version control? And then we're going to kind of evolve from there. And at any point, if you want to stop me and ask questions, please feel free to do so. I am by no means a Git expert or an open source expert. Rather, I like to talk about things that I know like a little bit about, but in preparation for whatever I'm talking about to give, I get to learn a lot more in the process. It's a great way to live. I definitely encourage that as well. But yeah, so feel free to ask questions. And if I don't know it, we'll work hard to point you in the direction of resources where you'll be able to get the answer. But okay, so no matter where you are on your software development and Python journey, let's say that you need, you decide, what, I've been working on this project by myself for a while, or I want to learn how to work on a software engineering team. You're going to have to move beyond just having code that is on your personal laptop, and you're going to need to be able to share code with others. And if you find yourself in that position, you want version control. If you also want to just collaborate with your past or future self, I don't know if you've had this experience where you've written code and then come back 2 years later, and even though it was something that was only intended for you, you have a hard time finding it, or you have a hard time remembering what on earth did this code actually do. If you ever find yourself in that situation and want to future-proof your code, you want version control. If you want to see the history for files, see what changed with recent updates, you want version control. If you need different environments for your code, so let's say you have worked on a software project by yourself or with others, you want to have that code working, have a production environment, but you want to do some development to make some updates on the back end that doesn't mess around with any of the code that you have that is production facing, you want version control for that as well. So version control is just the practice of tracking and managing changes to software code. Version control as a practice is like something that is pretty broad, but that is generally accepted to be best practices in the software engineering community. There are various version control systems that exist. So that's software that helps make version control easy. GitHub is the most popular version control system that exists. They have over 200 million projects that are being tracked, and that's why we're going to talk about them today. But there are also others. Our company, Pyrates, uses GitHub to track and manage all of our code. So it can be used to track private projects for enterprises, but it also hosts millions of what are called open source projects. And that open source projects are software that anyone can use, anyone can see, anybody can modify, and anybody can share. And that is what is so cool about open source projects, is that people that are just at the beginning of their software engineering journey, or those that have been doing it for 30, 40 years, can view the amazing work of others that are, more or less advanced than them, and also contribute to the cause. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to start sharing my screen, because I'm going to talk a little bit about some open source projects, and then talk about a couple of projects that are happening within our own organization, that is the Python Pyrates. All right. Great. So hopefully you see a really cool GitHub page. And if at any point the screen share stops working, please yell at me. So I'm on a GitHub page for Python, the Python organization. This is a Python meetup group. I'm sure that you've probably heard at some point in your Python journey that Python is open source software. And it's true. You can come and see the actual Python code here right on GitHub. I'm just at github.com/Python. And you can, there's a whole lot of information with a README, but like all the code is right here. So whenever the Python contributors are making updates to this code, you can see exactly what they're doing and the different stages that their code has been in the past. Look, there's 112,000 commits for Python. So we can just click on this and we can go like, hey, let's go back and look at the history of Python. And we can just keep going and back and back and back and back and back and see how it has evolved over time. So that is one awesome part about GitHub and version controlling software, so that we can go and see the history for all these things. So Python is just one open source project of many that are on GitHub. I'm going to highlight a couple different ones here. Since I'm in data science, a open source project that I use all the time is called Pandas. And so beyond just adorable fuzzy creatures, it stands for the Python Data Analysis Library. And I use this every single day in my day job. Totally open source. It's, there's some people that contribute this that are completely volunteer, and there is, they do have their own foundation, so they do get some funding on the side. But something where it's just a bunch of people that are way smarter than I am that have gotten together and developed this entire library that makes my life a lot easier. And it's so, so cool. And so a couple other ones that I use frequently. TensorFlow is a deep learning library that Google produces, but they've open sourced most of the code that has been developed and is actively being developed. So you can go see that here. Scikit-learn is a machine learning library for Python. Again, open source on GitHub. You can go and see all the underlying code. So it's super, super cool. And beyond it just being, beyond just geeking out about this and going like, sweet, I can go and see what is actually going on and actively being developed. You yourselves, as someone who knows Python, even a little, like whether it's a little or a lot, can actually help contribute to these projects. Now, why might you want to do that? Well, if you're a beginning software engineer, just like I was back in 2016 when I was trying to exit academia and get into the tech sector, I was thinking, what could I do to boost my resume? Because I want to be able to highlight the fact that, hey, I have learned a little bit of Python and I want to be able to showcase what I've learned. I wish that I had somebody back at that time say, well, hey, Brian, there's a bunch of open source Python projects that are on GitHub. Why don't you go contribute code to one of these? Because it's an excellent way to showcase the experience that you have on your resume. or if you're a seasoned developer, you know, and you've been able to make a good living throughout your life, and you want to be able to contribute and provide software to others that are maybe just up and coming, or just work on cool projects that you know will help many. Some of these projects, they actually on GitHub actually show a used by metric, so you can see how many individuals use the code that is output by these open source projects. And look at this, for scikit-learn, over 320,000 users just right on here. So just because a couple thousand people got together and started working on this code, whether that's a little contribution or a lot, it's benefited hundreds of thousands because of that. So at this stage in the game, when I'm trying to mentor those that are up and coming in their software development journey, I really try to highlight, hey, you know what? Try to contribute to open source software, because it's a great way to really hone your skills and also to learn how to collaborate with others in a software development environment. So hopefully I've at least piqued interest or convinced some of you that, like, hey, this might be a good idea. But a pretty typical question right after that to follow would be like, okay, so I'm on board. How do I actually go about doing that? Fortunately, all of these projects will have a link somewhere. So here I'm on Panda's GitHub page. And if we go and look down here, dependencies, documentation, cool, all this stuff. Look at this. On their README, they have a little section that just says, hey, contribute to Pandas. They say, sweet, there's a bunch of things that are welcome, and a detailed overview on how to contribute can be found on the contributing guide. Cool, let's check that out. So here, let's pretend that I'm new to Python. I'm excited to contribute to this project that I find useful. I find this contributing to Pandas guide, and I go through here and I read through this, and I'm just like, oh man, there are a ton of steps. So that's pretty cool that they have this guide out so that anybody can join in and can try to contribute to the project. But this just looks really intense. Okay, it talks about working with the code, how to use GitHub, forking, creating branches, committing code, pushing changes, reviewing it. It just sounds like a lot. And so even though it's spelled out for you, the task of actually contributing your first time can be a little daunting. So what I wanted to do today, outside of just provide that general introduction and hopefully some motivation to try to get interested in contributing to open source, is I want to talk about an open source project that we're doing here at Python Pyrates that is a really easy thing to start contributing to. And I'll walk you through an example for contributing to the project. And it also is self-serving for Chris and I, because this is a project that we definitely want to get some help on. And so it's kind of a little PSA to, hey, no matter what your Python skill level, this is a way that you can contribute and can be much easier to get involved in than going to one of these massive open source projects that has thousands of contributors. So I'll pause real quickly for any questions. And then I'll talk about this project that we're working on right now. Okay. So one thing, so I'm a little bit new to the Python Pyrates. I have young kids, and you know, they keep things busy. And so I finally have a little bit more time. And I told Chris a couple of months ago, like, hey, I've got a little bit more time on my hands. I would love to be able to help out and help others learn Python. And so one thing that he said that they used to have kind of was an introductory course offered through Georgia Tech that was free and anybody could use. And they used to do this awesome program where everybody would take the course together and they would meet up pretty regularly and talk about what they learned. But that's not something that exists anymore. I have experience with several Python courses spread across the internet, but there is, even though they're relatively affordable, there's usually some type of paywall. And so Chris and I thought, you know, it would be cool if we could just look at all the different resources that are free across the internet and slowly compile an introductory Python course together using completely free resources so that we can then go and, you know, offer this course a couple times a year, lead people through it, and level up Python skills, you know, for this group. But what we noticed pretty quickly is that there's a lot of resources for going at like, people on YouTube that are explaining different Python concepts. But what really needs to happen is that there needs to be a really good repository of exercises. So watching somebody talk about code is one thing, but actually having these specific exercises that can gradually build your skill set as you're learning, that's where the real learning happens. And that's where what you see in the videos actually really gets melded into your brain. So what we started is a project that is on GitHub underneath the Portland Python Pyrates, where we're starting to compile a bunch of Python practice problems, and we're organizing them by problem sets so that all of the problems are kind of organized by topic. And in addition to just having a problem or an exercise up here that it's posted, we want to provide an interactive environment where you can go practice your Python skills right away. So I'm going to highlight this. So here's the repository. It's PDX Python Pyrates. And in the README here, there's just a little brief introduction. But so if I go and let's look at some of the problems that are under printing in Python. And this project is in its very early stages, so there's not a whole lot here. So for example, if I click on dictionaries, it's just a placeholder. It's like, hey, we're going to need to do the work here. And that's something that maybe one of you will get to help out with. But so if I go and I click on print, all right, there's a problem here that says, hey, using the print function, print at least 4 lines of your favorite poem or song lyrics. Do this on multiple lines. If you click here, it will take you on a link directly over to a Google Collaboratory notebook. And what this is this is a spot on the cloud that it links automatically to, where you can see this problem and then code your own solution live. Right here, you can run whatever code you want. So if we'll do a classic hello world, and I can execute the code saying, hey, make sure that you know what you're running, then it will run this Python code in line. And this is I think that this is a really great way to do this, because then if it removes a little bit of a barrier, so that if somebody really wants to just dive right in and do these exercises, they can just click that link and start coding. In addition to that, let me go back. In addition to that, they can see solutions to these exercises in a similar fashion. So so I can just print out, so I selected a couple lines from Stairway to Heaven, a huge Led Zeppelin fan, and printed out some song lyrics there. So not only are we trying to amass this huge repository of problems, but then also exercises that link to notebooks so people can go and just run them in the browser right there, solutions so that they can check their work. And the idea is that we'll eventually have hundreds of these problems so that somebody can just kind of get up and running really, really quickly. So this is a project that we're working on, and it's something that we're slowly whittling away at. And it would be helpful if anybody wants to, hop on board, help find different problems that they can put in problem sets from across the internet. And then once we have problems that we've identified that are good candidates to include in these problem sets, then also code up these exercise notebooks and solution notebooks, and then share it once it's ready. So because we're looking for contributors, I have a little contributing guide down here at the bottom, which we can click, and it provides us with some steps to contribute. And so for the remainder of this talk, what I want to do is just follow these steps and show you an example of how to do this right here to hopefully demystify the experience and make it a little bit easier. So I'll pause again for questions before I dive right on in, or just general comments. Okay. So I'm here at our contributing guide for this project. And so we have 9 specific steps in order to make this thing, sorry, if you are interested in contributing, so that you can follow and everything will just work out. So first, it says to look at the open issues page for areas where we need help and pick a specific problem to tackle. All right. If you are new to GitHub, issues is a really cool part of the software where for whatever project, somebody can come in here and they can post a new issue. And this type of issue could be a whole host of things. It could be like, hey, I use your software and there's a bug. It seems like something just isn't working the way that it's supposed to. And we could come in and say, hey, there is a bug here. And we could label this as a bug, and an issue could be submitted, and then the people who maintain the specific project will be alerted like, hey, somebody submitted a new issue, whatever. There's also different types of issues that you can do. We could talk about, we could request additional documentation. We could request an enhancement. So you can go onto any open source repository and open an issue if they have permission set up that way, and try to make that project a little bit better. When you're contributing to an open source project, so I'm going to go back to Pandas here real quick. You can come up and you can look at the open issues that they have, and don't worry, they only have 3,300 open. And each of these issues probably has a label attached to it. And one excellent label that I really want to call out here that has become kind of standard across all of GitHub is, I'm going to scroll down here a little bit, go to the next page. Here we go, is good first issue. So after an issue has been submitted, the maintainers of the project will say, you know what, this is actually something where if somebody hasn't contributed to this project before, they probably are skilled enough that they can tackle this problem and can fix it. And so we can see here that there's some bugs that are labeled as good first issue, and there's some documentation update requests for a good first issue. And some of these looks like they've already had some comments and potentially some pull requests, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. So good first issue is something that you can, if you're eager to contribute to a specific project, looking into issues and looking at good first issue is an excellent way to do that. Another cool thing about issues is that once you've amassed enough of them, you could say organize them into projects. So if we look at this tab here, we already have a project that is set up with the Python practice problems repository. And what that is basically we're looking to complete the problem sets for we're looking to complete 8 problem sets and get them to a spot where we feel comfortable with. At that point, we'll be able to share it with others within the Python Pyrates organization, or at that point, that'll really help us as we work on our introductory Python course. And so if we look in this here, we've got a lot of issues that are waiting to be worked on. And this is a Kanban board, so we can see like, hey, we've got some issues in the backlog to be worked at some other time. We've got some issues that are waiting in to-do status, meaning they're just ready to go. We need somebody to pick it up. And we actually have one in progress, which is assigned to me, which I'll talk about in here in just a second. So not only is GitHub a cool piece of software for just looking at the history of code, but it also is a great way to see what type of enhancements people are requesting. And with the projects feature, you can prioritize those enhancements and then see the progress of them as they go from backlog to to-do to done, for example. So another excellent introduction into the general software development lifecycle. All right, so I'm going to go back to the contributor guidelines. Okay, so it said number 1, look at the open issues page for areas where we need help and pick a specific problem and tackle. And so I'll go back to the open issues really quickly. And so one that I'm tackling is add a couple of print exercises using the print function, but here you go. So exercises and solution notebooks for the sets problem set, a bunch of issues in here. If you click on these and you want to contribute and you aren't quite sure exactly what they're looking for, then you can definitely reach out to the project maintainers and tag them. But we're going to focus on one specific one today, which is something that I've already started working on to prepare for this talk today. So that's step 1. Look at the open issues, pick a specific problem to tackle. Okay, cool. Step 2, fork this repository to your own GitHub account. So we haven't talked about forking yet. So if we go back to this code here, we can actually see the code up here in this little tree. We can see the different problem sets. and whatnot. So all this code is living in what is called the main branch. And forking is when somebody who might not already be involved in the project says, hey, I see your code as it is, and I know that you need some work done to it. So I'm going to copy that code, that's what forking is, to my own GitHub profile, and then I can work on whatever edits need to be made to resolve whatever issue I'm working on. And then at the end, when I think everything looks good, I can then do a pull request, which requests to the maintainers like, hey, I forked it, I did all the work that I needed to do. Let's now integrate that back into the main project so that those updates actually take place. And so each project has a fork button here at the upper right at the very top. If you can't see it, that means that you're just scrolled down a little bit. And so we go and we click on fork. Well, GitHub is going to tell me, hey, Brian, you have already forked this thing. But if I hadn't already done that, then you click it and it just says, all right, cool, we'll fork this code over to your GitHub profile. What do you want to call it? And in fact, part of the contributor guidelines is it says, hey, pick your first name and then append that to Python practice problems and fork it to your own spot. I got to stop leaving the contributor guidelines. So if we have forked it, then it says what you should do next is clone the fork to your local machine. So what cloning is so here now I'm over at the fork that I have over on my GitHub profile. So we can now see that it's Python practice problems, Brian, forked from this main repository where the code is centralized. And cloning code to your machine, if you're not familiar, is just taking all this code that is stored in GitHub, and then it puts a copy of it using the Git framework onto your local computer. And the way that we do that is it says, hey, just copy this URL right here. That's copied. And now I'm going to go over to my terminal. And I'm in a specific directory, and I'm just going to say git clone, and I'm going to paste that Git URL. So once I do that, all it did is it grabbed all the code that is in the repository, and then it put it on my local machine in whatever folder I'm in. So if I clear here, and then I'm going to list, now I have this folder that's called Python Practice Problems Brian. And then I'll go in here and list what's here, and I can see the license, README, docs, problem sets, which is exactly what I see here on GitHub, license, README, docs, problem set. So all I did was I copied the code. And so now it's on my local machine. So if we go back to the contributing guide, we forked this, we cloned it to our local machine. And now what's cool about this is, so now we have this forked repository. Now, if I go and I make updates to this fork, but at the same time, somebody else is making updates and the original repository under Python Pyrates, if it has any updates that happen on it, I also want to make sure that my fork is up to date with what's going on there. And so that's why this next step of the contributing guide, what it does is it requests that we connect the fork that we just made to our upstream Python practice problems repository. So that way it'll be really easy to integrate whatever changes are made on the main repository into the fork that we have running. So since I am in this directory, here, I'll clear this again. Since we're already within the Python practice problems Brian directory, I can now copy this command that I recommend doing. So what this is just doing is will make it really easy for us to integrate whatever code changes happen. And cool, now we're set up for that. And then so all we have to do then is do git pull and this is really helpful so that if anybody makes any changes, then we can automatically get everything up to date on our local computer with whatever happens up in GitHub. All right. Step 5, before making edits, pull the latest code. That's what I just did. All right, and now it says, let's create a new branch and make edits. So if you're not familiar with branching, so even in this, so here in this repository, as I mentioned, I have my main branch. So I want to leave the main branch as like what represents the best state, what is, like production level code. And then as I develop new software, instead of modifying this main branch, what I'll do is I'll branch off of main so that I have a development environment that I can play around with new code and get ready to integrate back into main so that nothing breaks. I'll pause a second for questions. At this point, I'm wondering if my microphone's still working since I haven't had any questions.
It is still working, Brian.
Okay, cool.
Just so you know.
Excellent. Okay, so step 5, and I'm glad that this is being recorded so that we can, because it's covering a lot, so you can come back in and watch it over and look at the example again. So yeah, pull the latest code. So now create a new branch and make some edits. All righty. So here I'll, since I just cloned this repository, I will create a new branch. And okay, so this is just the Git command line. So I'm going to create a new branch and I'm going to check out this branch. And what that means is that we're just going to start developing under this new branch, and I'll call it awesome new branch. So sweet, we switched to a new branch called awesome new branch. So now I would develop whatever code that I wanted under this awesome new branch. And then eventually I could push it back into main so it can get can merge in with the rest of the code for the project. And so now it says, all right, we created a new branch, let's make some edits. So the edits that I would want to be making for this branch would be related to whatever issue I'm trying to resolve that is in the main repository. So for our specific use case, since we're just trying to amass this huge collection of problems related to helping people learn Python and then notebooks for exercises and solutions, on the contributors guide here, it actually identifies like, hey, here's what you'll be doing. You'll either be adding exercise ideas to a problem set, you'll be creating exercise notebooks for the problems that are in that problem set, you'll be coding up solutions, you'll be updating READMEs. And if you're thinking at this point, like, okay, well, like, how do I know exactly where to structure the code? Like, what updates would I need to make to a README? How do I make sure that the notebooks that I would put in there look exactly the way that the project maintainers want them to look like? And so it says, edit, guidelines for how to do these are given in the following section. So sweet, I can click and look, here's some edit guidelines. So it's like, hey, if you want to create a new problem set, like if we go back to the main one and there isn't a link here, that means we don't already have a problem set created for it. Like, what would that look like? Well, here's some instructions on what we recommend for doing that. Let's say you just want to add problems to a problem set. So let's click on sets, for example. Right now, there's no problems in here. What would that look like? It provides some instructions for that. What if there are already a lot of problems within a problem set? So I'm going to click on strings because I know I've worked on that one a little bit. A second, since GitHub is having a little hiccup. Okay, there it goes. All right, so there's 14 problems that are already in this problem set, but none of the notebooks have been set up for it. So that's where this applies. So it gives some specific sets of instructions for like how to structure the notebooks for the exercises and the solutions. So like we try to spell everything out for you, and you'll see this on lots of mature open source projects. Is they aren't trying to be cryptic. Yes, it is a decent amount of work, but they do really want help. So they'll try to make it as easy as possible for you all to pitch in. So that's the step 6, is creating a branch and making some edits. So if we go back to the original issue that I was looking at, I'll go back to this project. All right, there's an issue that I actually already started working on to get ready for this talk. And it says, add a couple of print exercises and solutions. So we go back to this repository here. We'll click on problem sets. We'll go to print. Right now, there's just one problem and solution. And even if we go back to the main repository, so this is the one under Python Pyrates, we go and look, and in print, there's just one problem and its solution. So what I did yesterday, and I'm going to open up my code editor now, which is Visual Studio Code, which I highly recommend, by the way. All right, so what I've already done, and I won't go into the updates that I did, but this same README is, that we can see here. So instead of there just being one problem in the print function, as opposed to, so like you can see there's just one problem here using the print function, blah, 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 blah. I've updated it. So now there's 2 additional problems. And for each one of these, I added a notebook for the exercise. So instead of just exercise 1, we now have exercises 1, 2, and 3 and their solutions. And then I also updated the README for the print problem set. And one reason why I love Visual Studio Code so much for working on projects is it actually has a Git panel. So I could go into my command line and navigate around and add the files that I modified and added in order to push to this branch. But with Visual Studio Code, I can just say, hey, here's the files that have been modified and that are currently untracked. I now want to add all of these. I want to stage them for committing. And I'm going to do a commit message. Let's see, added 2 more print-related exercises. Then I can go ahead and commit those and publish the branch that I'm working on. And then once I've done that, so I'll go back to our contributing guide. So we made some edits. We pushed the branch. It says, all right, review your changes and push them to your fork, which we just did. And then let's submit a pull request. So let's talk about what that is. So if I go back to the repository that I have forked, look at this. It says, hey, add print exercises and solutions, which is a branch that I created and worked on a little bit yesterday, had recent pushes less than a minute ago. And it's providing this button right next to it that says, hey, let's compare this new code to the original code and submit a pull request. Now, just like forking and branching is a way to say, hey, we have this code that we like, let's branch off of it so that we can develop on this branch. A pull request is the process of merging this new branch back into main. We like main to be like the production ready stuff. And so the pull request is a functionality where we can integrate this new work with the main branch. So I'm going to click compare and pull requests. And again, I am, and I want to highlight something before I do that. So here, again, I am in my fork. But since this fork is based off of the main Python Pyrates repository, when I click pull request, all of a sudden, I'm now in Portland Python Pyrates, the main repository, and it's saying, hey, we want to open a pull request so that the core Python Pyrates, Python practice problems repository, the main branch, is now going to merge all the code from my fork and the branch that I just created and made updates in. So so the added 2 more print related exercises is a description that I have for this pull request. I can leave some comments. I don't know. I'll just say do the things. And I can create a pull request. And then so if one of you all are doing this, you'll create a pull request. And then what this will happen is, so the people that maintain this repository will then get notified like, hey, there's new code that somebody wants to push into your main project. You should go check it out and review it. And so in this screen, I can say like, all right, well, let's check this out. So if I want to write a message to the person that submitted this pull request, then I can go, I can leave comments to them for whatever. But I can also look at, all right, here's the individual commits that were related to this pull request. I can go and I can check out the files that were changed. And so here I see, so the problem sets, the print, the README markdown file, it's got some new lines to it. It looks like we've got some brand new files, which represents the notebooks that I coded up yesterday. And if somebody else was doing this and submitted this pull request, and then I was, as a maintainer for the repository, I could come in and I can review all these changes, and I could leave comments. I could approve or request additional changes happen on this pull request before it gets integrated with the main code. If I'm looking through the code and I see something weird, I could say, like, I could add a comment here and say, like, hey, this needs updated. And I could start a review, or I can add comments. So GitHub, again, has this great user interface that allows us to do all of the sophisticated aspects of sharing and collaborating with writing software. So in this case, though, I'm the one that maintains this repository, and I'm also the one that submitted the pull request. So I don't have to worry about reviewing it as a maintainer, since I already reviewed the code yesterday. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to click merge pull requests and confirm the merge. And so now it says, hey, this pull request has successfully merged and closed. So I'm going to go back over into the code here, and we'll note that, hey, under the main branch, just now, we merged in some new information. And I'll go back to the print problem set. And voila, I can see now that instead of there just being one exercise, as was in here before, now there are 3 exercises, and each one of these has exercise and solution notebooks that I coded up yesterday. And the cool thing too about these exercises is that this code is actually version controlled, or like this notebook is actually version controlled within the project itself. So if I go back here, I can go into problem sets and print exercises, and I can look at this notebook within GitHub itself. And the links that I have that are in that problem set, all they're doing is they're linking to Google Collaboratory, which is that interactive notebook environment, which all it's doing is it's going to GitHub and saying, hey, I'm looking for a notebook at this address. Let's go ahead and just grab that code and then put it up in Google Collaboratory. So I'll go back to the practice problems, collaborating, or the contributor guidelines. And so after all of these steps, so we looked at open issues, we forked the repository, we were able to clone that fork to our local machine, we created a new branch, we made some edits, we committed those edits and submitted a pull request. And after a review, they were, we approved that pull request and merged the code back into the main branch. So we followed all of these steps as a quick example, and just from that made a contribution to this open source project. And so I know that's a lot to cover in 45 minutes, but I wanted to at least do it that quickly to kind of like dangle the carrot and say, like, hey, although it takes a little bit of getting used to, if you haven't done open source contributing before, it's something that anybody can do if they have experience and exposure to Python. And this is a great project to get involved in if you want, kind of an easier open source project to begin contributing. So that's all that I had on the agenda. Again, glad that this is recorded so that it can be reviewed and you can slow my low monotonous voice down in order to make it a little bit easier to follow. But at this point, I'll kind of open it up for questions with the remaining time that we have. Or if there are those that have, that use GitHub or some other type of version control framework and just want to pitch in with their experience or contributing towards open source, please do, because as I said, I am certainly not an expert in this domain.
Yeah, no, that was great, Brian. I think I just wanted to add that for folks that are, like, when I was first starting to contribute to open source projects and getting my feet wet with that, first of all, this is going to be, I agree, a great way to get started, because how I got started and how a lot of people get started is contributing to documentation. Like, just go into the documentation, and even just a typo, Like you'll find typos, you'll find all kinds of stuff, and contributing just in that way is really helpful for developers and other people, because obviously the documentation is how everybody learns how to use the thing in the first place, right? So getting started there and getting used to the workflow and then kind of building on top of that is great. In this case, you can, even if you're just intro to Python, like please, yeah, definitely contribute. If you can write a print statement, which if you've touched Python, I'm sure you can, or I hope you can. If not, take the course and we'll help you. But yeah, definitely contribute. And it's also a great way to boost kind of your resume and your credibility as a Python developer.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, David.
Long time. Hey, Chris. It's been a while, man. I'm glad that you survived.
Yeah, we're all here.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Great presentation. I just want to add that, just highlight that extremely important, like to put GitHub on your resumes, like really learn all these commands, really learn how that works. It's almost as important as learning Python itself. I work right now in a large project. We are migrating a lot of on-premise databases with all the ETLs, transforming data into the cloud. And there are not just Python, I mean, any type of files we can track with GitHub. So for example, Azure has a platform for ETL called Data Factory. And when you see how that works is basically Microsoft is tracking all the metadata for the ETL into JSON files. And we are using GitHub integrated with Data Factory to track the version of all those files. And you know how frustrating it is when you have a large team and they don't know GitHub. Tons of issues. It's so hard to synchronize, explaining what's a branch, that they need to work isolated. Sometimes they put bugs into the code. It's just crazy. So really knowing Git will help a lot in these teams. And not just that, when we are migrating these objects to production or PSAP or any other environments, basically what we do is move these JSON files to those environments. And since they are getting tracked in GitHub, it's really easy to see who, when, why those changes were done. And then we integrated the DevOps tool Jenkins with GitHub. So basically what Jenkins does is gets the repo, gets those files, and then using them creates another thing, another internal operation, and deploy those files into these environments. So it's really important. The other part that we use a lot Git is to track all the databases DDLs. So the DDLs are these files where we, for example, we create a table, or we create a store procedure, or we create a function for the databases. So each single table gets stored into one file. And we can see the progression of that table when someone created a new column or changed a data type, or I don't know, added a new logic into the store procedure. And then we have a system there that package all these files and then deploy them into, again, the higher environments, PSAP, production, or QA, whatever. Really important. We use GitHub again with Jenkins. It gets those files, it scans them, search for dependencies or errors or whatever. It let us know that. And if all of them passes, it deploys whatever is in these files into these environments. So really important. I would say put a lot of attention to Git. It's a really huge plus in our resumes. I really appreciate this talk.
Yeah. And just for background, just to let everybody know, David works at Kaiser Permanente as a developer, and also for background, Brian and I all started around the same. We were all trying to get into programming and tech around the same time. We met each other through meetups here in Portland, Oregon, and we had to learn all this stuff. We learned it all from scratch. We all started at the same place, like barely able to code. Like, we were okay, but we all came from right where many of you likely are. And so now we all are in different places, but all thriving, so it takes time and it takes patience, but that's kind of what the point of this group is, right? Is to convey to you, it's hard to find on the internet. Like, there's lots of things that teach you how to code, but like there's other important aspects like David was mentioning, and Git is just absolutely, I 100% agree. Absolutely 100%. One of those crucial things that a lot of people bypass for years on end. And then you get into industry and you meet sometimes senior developers, and their understanding of Git is very, very broad, a little loose, and they've been just kind of skating by. So that the more you grasp this stuff, like the internals, the better off you'll be in the long run. 100%.
And the last plug that I'll put in there for, again, I know that it can be intimidating to contribute to some of these projects, especially huge ones like Python or TensorFlow or whatever. But like, I'm an advocate of lifelong learning, and the best way to learn anything is when you can do a thing and somebody that knows more than you can give you direct feedback as quickly as possible. That is the fastest way to learn anything. And so the worst case scenario that you'll run across with one of these, trying to submit a pull request and pushing some code to a project that you like, is that, well, I guess the worst thing is that people are too busy and it's no longer in development and you never hear back. But the next worst thing that could happen is they say, yo, you've got all these errors, go fix these before we can pull this in. And then what you just had is an expert give you pointed tips on how to improve your code, which is tremendously valuable. So trying to just, get out there and be bold and, just try to contribute to these projects is an excellent learning experience in terms of being able to improve the quality of your code as well.
Did you want to address that question from Michael really quick, Brian, that he popped in the chat?
Yeah, I was actually just looking at, so yeah, there definitely are some different branching strategies. And so we even have some different branching strategies at our organization. I'm on my analytics team. There's just 4 analysts. So we are able to I don't want to say we're laissez-faire in our branching strategy, but it's a little easier to maintain. So we have adopted a pretty minimal strategy, and there aren't a whole lot, we don't have to worry about certain releases or features or anything like that. But some of our bigger development teams at work, they have very sophisticated, explicit, structured branching strategies. And so there are several that different organizations do use or different teams do use. And so I just put a link in the chat so that you can go and do a look. And that's an article that I've referenced somebody to before. And if you just look in Google at Git branch strategies, you'll find a whole lot of blog posts from professionals that are more involved and have more expertise than I do on some different strategies that you can use to employ. And that's the cool thing, is like, even if you're working on a project by yourself, you can still practice this. Even if you're the only one that's sharing code, you can, explore with doing all these different branches. Since GitHub is free to use, there is definitely no harm, like only good things from practicing, even if it's by yourself and you're not sharing code with anybody. So that is a great question.
Yeah, it depends I think it depends. The larger the team gets, the more strict you need to get with what you're doing, because not everybody's talking to each other and, communicating and that kind of thing. And so it ends up being the case that you do need to it's almost like communication through branching and code and all of those things. It really kind of gets points across, and it's especially hard to learn these things when you're working by yourself, right? Like, what do you do? So Yeah, great question. I'm posting, by the way, there's a great YouTube channel that I follow called Computer File, and I just posted the link in the chat. Computer File did a overview of how Git actually works. So they do a little bit of a deeper dive into the Git directory, the .git directory, and what actually is happening in the background that allows all of these magical things that Git does to happen. And so it's definitely worth investigating further if you really want to understand Git in a deeper sense. Not that you need to, but can't hurt, right?
Easy to geek out on.
For sure. It's a black hole, just like anything in tech.
Right.
Oh, man. All right. Well, we're right up against the hour. It is 1 p.m. But I want to thank everybody for coming. And thank you, Brian. That was really, really awesome. I'm super excited for that project and where the Pirates are going. Really excited to have you as a co-organizer. And I guess I should probably start contributing to that repo as well.
Well, now it'll be easy because I had to make sure the contributing guide was in ship shape for this talk. So it was a good forcing.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I will definitely be referencing that. And everybody reach out to myself or Brian or David, really. David's also on the Slack channel. Any of us would be happy to answer any questions that you have about Git in general or specifically about this project or whatever. So never hesitate to reach out. I think we are all on LinkedIn. I'm happy to have people reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect with me there. So feel free to do that as well. Other than that, I'll leave it there. And this video should be posted within 24 hours on our YouTube channel at Python Pyrates. Just look up Python Pyrates, you'll find the YouTube channel. And with that, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Dude.